How do you move forward when it feels like the world has forgotten you? Not ignored, not overlooked, but truly forgotten. You wake up in a room that doesn't feel like home. You eat a meal that doesn't taste like anything. You laugh in front of others only to feel the echo of that silence inside you louder than any crowd. And then comes the moment no one talks about. Not rock bottom, not heartbreak, something worse. The moment you feel like even if you disappeared, no one would notice. No one would stop, not even for a breath. If you're here, listening, maybe you know exactly what I'm talking about. Maybe your chest is carrying that weight right now. The weight of pretending, the weight of smiling when your soul is quiet. The weight of scrolling through perfect lives on a glowing screen, wondering if yours will ever feel full again. But let me tell you something softly, gently, as if I'm sitting right next to you. Even in your loneliness, you are not alone. And that ache in your chest, that emptiness, that's not your weakness. It's the place where something new is trying to grow. This video is a lifeline, not the kind that yells at you to think positive or hustle harder. No, that's not what you need. This is a quiet conversation, a mirror held up to the parts of you that haven't felt seen in a long time. In this story, we'll walk with Carl Jung's shadow, not the textbook version, but the real shadow, the one that whispers in your lowest moments, the one you try to hide from others. We'll walk into it, gently, honestly, without fear, because when you finally stop running from the parts of yourself you were told were too messy, too emotional, too much, you begin to lead yourself home. So if you've ever felt behind in life, if you've ever felt left out, left behind, or like life is happening for everyone but you, stay. Let this be the space where your truth is not just heard, but honored. And if something here touches your heart, gently press that like button. Subscribe to the channel, not because you have to, but because maybe, just maybe, you want to remember you're not the only one navigating this quiet storm. Take a breath. There's power in being the one who rises, even when it feels like no one sees you falling. Let's begin. There was a boy who once stood at the edge of a lake, watching the wind ripple across the surface. He was small, too quiet for the world around him. His hands were always cold. Not from the weather, but from the way people passed by without reaching back. He learned early on that silence keeps you safe, that if you don't ask for too much, maybe you won't be abandoned, that if you smile just enough, people might believe you're okay. But deep down, he hated that silence. Because no matter how well he performed for the world, no one ever stayed long enough to see the truth. They liked his light, but they weren't interested in his shadows. And eventually, the boy grew up, not into a man full of confidence and clarity, but into someone who still felt invisible, even when surrounded by others. Someone who checked every box, succeeded just enough, and still lay awake at night wondering if any of it meant anything. He tried to convince himself it didn't matter, but it did, because all he ever wanted was to be met where he was, fully, softly, without judgment. You might be that boy, or girl, or someone in between. You might be walking through life doing everything right, and still feel wrong, still feel empty, still feel like you're waiting for someone to truly see you and say, "Hey, you don't have to pretend with me." Carl Jung once said, "Loneliness does not come from having no people around you, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you." Let that sink in. Loneliness isn't about being alone. It's about feeling unseen, even when you're surrounded. You smile in group photos. You laugh at the right moments. You nod when someone asks, "You good?" But they don't see the storm behind your eyes. The one that says, "Please, I'm barely holding it together. Please don't walk away if I let you see me." Maybe the hardest part isn't being alone. Maybe the hardest part is pretending you're not. But listen to me, this next part is important. When you feel like no one understands you, it's not because you're broken. It's because you've grown in a way they haven't. You feel things deeply. You process life through emotion, not achievement. You ask questions others are afraid to ask. You can sit in silence with someone and feel more connection than hours of surface level talking. You are not too much. You are not too intense. You are not too sensitive. You are tuned into a frequency that others have forgotten, and that's your gift. Even if it doesn't feel like one yet, you're not behind. You're just walking a different path, one that doesn't shout, one that doesn't perform, one that isn't about proving or pleasing or pretending. It's the path of inner truth, and yes, it's lonelier at first, because most people are still numbing, still running, still playing roles they don't even realize they're stuck in. But your loneliness, that's a sign you're waking up. And I know how painful that is. Because when you wake up, you start to see things for what they really are. You see how many of your relationships were built on who you were trying to be, not who you really are. You see how much of your energy went into keeping people comfortable instead of keeping yourself whole. You see how deeply you've betrayed your own heart just to avoid being alone. And that moment when you finally stop abandoning yourself is where everything begins to shift. You start showing up differently. You start speaking more honestly. You start setting quiet boundaries that feel like home. And people will notice. Some will leave. But the ones who stay, they will see all of you. Not just the light, but the ache, the doubt, the wonder, the beauty of someone who has learned to stay soft, even after being hardened by life. This is your turning point, and you don't need anyone's permission to begin. Take another breath. Feel that? That's you, still here, still trying, still capable of loving even when your heart has been dragged through gravel. You're not weak for feeling it all. You're alive. There's something strange that happens when you begin to come back to yourself. At first, it doesn't feel like healing. It feels like grieving. You don't rise with confidence or march forward with clarity. No, the return begins in quiet moments, the kind that make your chest heavy. You grieve the years you spent hiding, the years you smiled just to be loved, the versions of yourself you created to feel safe. You grieve the people who never really saw you, the ones who said they cared but only stayed for the version of you that asked for nothing in return. It's a slow grief, one that doesn't cry out loud but echoes softly in the spaces where you once begged for connection. But in that grief, something new begins to stir. It doesn't roar, it doesn't demand attention, it whispers, "I'm still here." That's your soul, gently knocking. And maybe, just maybe, that's all you've ever needed. Not to be rescued, not to be adored, but to remember that there's a deeper self inside you, waiting patiently, ready to lead. The one that knows your worth even when no one applauds it. The one that sees your heart even when the world moves too fast to notice. The one that isn't afraid of loneliness because it's no longer confused by it. You start to see that being alone isn't the same as being unworthy. You begin to reclaim the sacred parts of yourself that you used to hide. Your intuition sharpens. You no longer need everyone's approval to feel valid. You start trusting your no just as much as your yes. You walk away from people who drain you even if they once felt like home. You become a quieter version of yourself. Not because you're shrinking, but because peace doesn't need to prove anything. And when the loneliness returns, and it will, you no longer see it as a sign that something is wrong. You see it as a doorway. Because in that space, you get to choose what kind of life you're willing to build. Not the one handed to you by family expectations, not the one built on survival, not the one that keeps everyone else comfortable, but the one that finally feels like yours. You begin to attract differently. People who speak your emotional language, conversations that don't exhaust you, moments that feel full without needing to be loud. And for the first time, maybe ever, you begin to feel met. Not fixed, not saved, just seen. And in that moment, you realize something Carl Jung tried to help us understand all along. The path forward isn't about escaping your shadow. It's about walking beside it. Because the parts of you that feel too broken, too complicated, too much, they're not mistakes. They're maps. Maps back to the places inside you that were never loved properly. And now it's your turn. to sit with those parts, to hold them like a parent holds a child, to say the words no one ever said to you when you needed them most. I see you. You don't have to be perfect to be loved. You don't have to earn rest. You don't have to hustle for healing. And you certainly don't have to keep pretending you're fine. Not here. Not now. Not anymore. Because maybe the real journey isn't about getting ahead. Maybe it's about returning to the part of you that was never broken, just buried. To the voice inside that never left you just silenced by noise. To the knowing that your pace is sacred and your path is allowed to be quiet, slow, even lonely at times. Because the ones who learn how to walk alone become the ones who never have to beg again to be seen. There's a silence that feels like abandonment, and there's a silence that feels like peace. The difference? One is forced upon you when others leave. The other, you choose when you finally stop abandoning yourself. You may not feel like you've chosen much in this life. Maybe you grew up in chaos. Maybe love came with conditions. Maybe every time you trusted someone, they turned away when you needed them most. And over time, you began to believe that your needs were the problem. That if you could just want less, feel less, speak less, maybe someone would stay. So you became small in all the quiet ways. You let people take. You let them misunderstand you. You let them call you strong just because you never told them how deeply you were drowning. But strength isn't silence. And strength is not how much you can carry alone. It's how gently you return to yourself when no one else shows up. That's what Jung meant when he spoke of the shadow, not as something to be feared, but as something to be known. It's the parts of you you've locked away because someone once made you feel they were too much. Your anger, your longing, your tenderness, your dreams, your voice. They're all there, behind the mask you've worn just to be accepted. And eventually, the mask begins to suffocate, because there's nothing lonelier than being surrounded by people who only love the version of you that makes them comfortable. So let me say something you may need to hear right now, especially if today feels heavy. You are allowed to take the mask off. You are allowed to want more than just survival. You are allowed to stop performing strength and start honoring softness. There is no timeline, no rush, no finish line to cross. Your healing is not a race. It's a remembering. And yes, it's lonely sometimes because you're shedding a lifetime of stories that never belonged to you. You're walking away from roles that gave you identity, but not peace. That takes courage. To be the one who breaks the cycle, who sits in the silence instead of filling it with noise, who stops pretending just to fit in. And here's the part that no one tells you. The moment you stop needing others to understand you is the moment you finally understand yourself. You begin to notice things differently. The way your breath deepens when you're alone and not anxious. The way your body softens when you're around people who feel safe. The way your heart opens when you stop trying to prove your worth. And slowly, you start to rebuild. Not a life that looks good from the outside, but one that feels right on the inside. You begin to trust your inner voice again. The one that whispers truths like, "This connection doesn't feel right. I don't need to chase love. I am love. I deserve rest without guilt." And those truths, they become your compass. Not everyone will understand the new you. Some will say you've changed. Some will distance themselves. Some will try to pull you back into old dynamics where you kept yourself small just to be loved. Let them. Because anyone who leaves when you stop betraying yourself was never truly with you. This is your liberation, not in rebellion, but in soft, steady returning to your body, to your breath, to your knowing, to the parts of you that always waited to be chosen by the one person who matters most. You. And once you choose yourself, not in ego, but in deep reverence, something magical happens. The loneliness, it begins to shift. It doesn't disappear, but it no longer feels empty. It feels sacred, because now you understand you were never truly alone. You were just disconnected from the one place love begins, inside. It's strange how the most important relationship you'll ever have is the one you've been avoiding, not out of neglect, but out of pain. Because getting close to yourself means looking at the parts that still hurt, the things you've buried beneath distractions, responsibilities, and expectations. The memories that still sting when you're lying in bed at night, scrolling through your phone just to keep the silence at bay. You know the ones. The friend who ghosted you when you were at your lowest. The partner who praised your softness only to weaponize it later. The family that expected your obedience but never offered understanding. And most painfully, the moments you abandon yourself just to keep someone else close. That kind of truth is heavy, but there's something freeing in facing it. When you stop gaslighting your own feelings, you begin to see your patterns, not to judge them, not to hate yourself for them, but to understand how you learned to survive. You silenced yourself to stay safe. You tolerated crumbs because you believed that was all you deserved. You kept the peace, even when it meant betraying your own. But survival is not the same as living. And maybe, just maybe, you're ready for more. Not more noise, not more people, not more attention, more truth, more presence, more quiet moments where you finally feel at home in your own body. It won't come all at once, but healing never does. It arrives in small, sacred ways. You say no without explaining. You cry without shame. You laugh deeply even though life isn't perfect. You wake up and feel calm. Not because everything is fixed, but because you're no longer at war with yourself. That's when you realize something vital. Getting ahead in life doesn't mean outrunning your pain. It means integrating it, letting it teach you, shape you, soften you, because your wounds aren't in the way, they are the way. Carl Jung believed that wholeness comes not from perfection, but from embracing your contradictions. The sacred and the scarred, the strong and the scared, the fierce and the fragile. You are all of it. And that is your power. You don't have to pretend to be okay when you're not. You don't have to hide your needs, your emotions, or your desires. You don't have to carry the weight of others just to feel loved. You get to show up fully, messy, tender, human, because the people who are meant for you won't ask you to shrink. They'll meet you in your truth, in your depth, in your becoming. And maybe you haven't met them yet. Maybe you're still walking that stretch of the path where it feels like no one gets it. But listen to me, you are not behind. You are not broken. You are in a sacred season. One where you're learning how to be with yourself in a way no one ever taught you. That's not failure. That's freedom. To stop chasing, to stop proving, to stop bending yourself into shapes that don't fit just to belong. The moment you decide that your peace is more important than their approval, everything changes. You start to feel powerful, not loud powerful, yet powerful, grounded, clear, rooted in a kind of self-love that doesn't beg, doesn't chase, doesn't perform. It just is. And in that place, even your loneliness feels different. It becomes a companion, not a curse. A reminder that your relationship with yourself is sacred enough to protect. So breathe. Let the noise fade. You are not falling behind. You're falling inward. There is a quiet revolution happening inside you. Not the kind others can see, not the kind that earns applause or praise, but the kind that whispers, I'm not going to abandon myself anymore. That's power. Real power. The kind that doesn't need to shout to be felt. The kind that doesn't need followers, or filters, or validation to know it's real. Because when you begin to truly meet yourself, something soft and unstoppable begins to unfold. You stop begging to be chosen. You stop bending to be kept. You stop shrinking to be understood. And here's what no one tells you. There will be grief in that. Deep, aching grief. Because there's a version of you that lived on approval, that built connection through self-sacrifice, that made homes out of people who never once made you feel safe. Letting go of that version feels like death, and in a way it is. But what grows in her place? That's life. The real kind. The kind you've been craving in the quiet corners of your soul. The kind that feels like walking barefoot on earth that finally welcomes you. The kind that doesn't ask you to fix yourself just to feel yourself. Because no one ever taught you how to sit with pain without making it mean you were unworthy. They told you to be strong, to move on, to stay positive. But strength without softness is armor, and you were never meant to live behind a shield. So now, you're learning a different way. You're not building walls. You're planting boundaries. You're not pushing emotions away. You're letting them pass through like waves. You're not chasing a version of success that requires your soul to disappear. You're defining your own, and maybe that means some people will say, "You've changed." Let them. Maybe they liked the version of you that stayed quiet, that stayed small, that stayed emotionally available for their wounds while ignoring your own. But you're done bleeding for connection. You're done setting yourself on fire to keep others warm. You're done being everything for everyone while feeling like nothing to yourself. Now you're choosing presence. Now you're choosing wholeness. Even when it's hard, even when it's lonely, even when the voice in your head says, maybe you're asking for too much. You're not. You're asking for the kind of life that holds you fully. The kind where your soul doesn't have to hide. Where your too muchness is met with reverence, not rejection. Where your quiet pain isn't minimized but honored. And here's what I know. You will get there. Because you're already on the way. The fact that you're still here, still listening, still breathing, still showing up means something inside you refuses to give up. And that part of you, that part is leading. You don't need all the answers today. You don't need a 5-year plan or the perfect morning routine. You just need to keep walking. Softly, slowly, honestly. Because you're not getting ahead by force. You're moving forward through truth. The truth of who you are, the truth of what you feel, the truth of what you want, even if it terrifies you. And with every step, the loneliness shifts because you're no longer looking outside for something that's been inside you all along, belonging to yourself. And maybe, just maybe, that's what this journey has been about all along. Not getting ahead by the world's definition, not climbing some invisible ladder where the top is hollow and the applause is fleeting, but coming back to the one place you left behind in your search for love, safety, and meaning. You. Because getting ahead, when you feel completely alone, isn't about pushing through the silence. It's about learning to speak in it. It's about sitting in the middle of the ache and saying, even here, I choose me. Not perfectly, not always gracefully, but honestly. Because when you choose yourself in your most forgotten hour, you set a fire in your soul that no loneliness can touch. You stop asking, why did they leave? And start asking, why did I stay with people who made me feel unseen? You stop asking, what's wrong with me? And start asking, what wounds am I still carrying that make me think I'm unworthy of care? You stop living in reaction. You start living in reverence of your emotions, of your body, of your rhythm. And that reverence, it becomes your guide. You begin to hold yourself the way no one ever did. You speak more gently to your inner child. You forgive yourself for staying too long, trying too hard, or loving people who couldn't love you back. You become yours, wholly, finally, freely. And from that place, you begin to rebuild, slowly, truthfully, without rush, without shame. You find peace in moments that used to trigger you. You laugh in rooms where you once only survived. You cry without guilt, knowing your tears are sacred, not weak. And somewhere along the way, without forcing it, people come. Not to save you, but to meet you. The kind who've done their own healing, the kind who speak your language, the kind who don't flinch at your depth. Because the more you come home to yourself, the more you realize you were never meant to fit into shallow spaces. You were meant to bloom in places that nourish your soul. So if today feels heavy, if the silence feels too loud, if the road feels too long, just breathe. You're not behind. You're not broken. You're not alone. You're becoming. And your becoming is a sacred thing. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening with your heart. If this touched something deep in you, if it helped you feel a little less alone, consider sharing it with someone who needs to hear it too. Gently tap the like button and subscribe if you want to stay connected in this space where healing has a voice and softness is strength. Leave a comment below, share your thoughts, your story, or even just a still here. Let this be more than a video. Let it be a quiet revolution, one soul at a time, one truth at a time. You're not alone anymore. You're home